So hopefully, Rajiv, we can count on you to take the meeting notes. And with that, why don't we get started? Uh, you are in the Content Delivery Networks Interconnection Working Group meeting here at Bangkok. It's 9:30 in the morning here, and I know some of the folks, it's late in the day on Wednesday, so appreciate it, and thanks for joining. My name is Sanjay Mishra. I am one of the co-chairs, and I'm joined here by my colleagues, Kevin Ma and Chris Lemons. They're both remote. And again, good morning and good evening, everyone. Let's start with Note Well. As you can see that the IETF Code of Conduct and specifically patents and Code of Conduct are listed here. And among other things, make sure that you get familiar with all the BCPs that are listed down here, that you're familiar with the process. And as well as note well in terms of make sure that you're nice to everyone. Essentially, that's what this slide is saying. And I'm probably going to skip over some of the meeting tips if everyone is here. And by Thursday, hopefully folks are familiar with it. And it hasn't changed from the last time, so or the before. So it's all the same. These are all the resources for you for accessing the agenda and the CDNI page, etc. All right. So with that, I do have something that I wanted to share here. First of all, a big thank you to our outgoing area director, Francesca. Thank you very much for your relentless support for the WIT area working group, as well as all your support here for the Content Delivery Networks Interconnection working group. So we really appreciate it. And as we were just talking before the meeting, 4 years have just gone by very fast, and I didn't even realize it. So wish you all the best. Anything you want to add to the group?
Thank you, Sanjay. Just that it was a pleasure to work with you all, and I leave you with Gori, who is going to be your responsible area director, and so I leave you in good hands, and I will still see you around.
Thank you again. And welcome, Gori. Really appreciate you joining in, and looking forward in working with you.
Hi, I'm Gori, and interesting to find out how CDNI works and what you're doing. Glad to be here.
Welcome. All right. So with that said, let's get into our agenda. It is pretty full as usual. You have seen this agenda before as well, but just to quickly recap, what we will start out with is go over the charter changes that we discussed in Dublin and on the mailing list as well. So Chris is going to just make sure that we walk through that once more. And I think it's also good that Gori is here, so he, as he takes the reins here, he gets familiar with it. And I know Alan had put out some suggestions, and Chris, you responded to that. So hopefully we can cover all the topics related to charter in the next 20 minutes. And then we have Glenn on the docket here, and Glenn has about at least five documents that I've listed here, but there may be more. So Glenn's going to walk us through with a number of documents. Some of them are waiting for adoption. Some of them are waiting to potentially go into the working group last call. So we will cover all of the details. And then we're going to have a discussion on Arnon's draft, private features, and I think that a lot has been exchanged in the mailing list. So let's reserve some time for that and just walk through that and maybe come to some conclusions. So that's about 20 minutes for that, and then we will jump into a protected secrets document that Ben has. We'll go over his changes, and that followed by, we've kept 25 minutes for Alan to to go over the CDNI triggers document. I think it really is taking the RFC 8007 BIS and reshaping it, retooling it in many different ways. And I believe version 16 is at a point that all the changes that were to be made have been made. So I think that the document has reached a state of there's no more changes that are planned other than anything that comes out of reviews. So that document definitely need reviews, a lot of reviews, and it has grown in volume and size from the original 8007. So that's pretty important work item for us to try to see if we can get to the closure, and hopefully even working group last call once the reviews are done and changes have been made. After that, we'll pivot over to the CDNI named footprint document that Alan has submitted. And Kevin, thank you for your extensive comments on that. So hopefully that will shape the direction between where we are with it and where we need to go between now and the IETF 123 in Madrid. And then lastly, I want to also go and revisit we need volunteers. We need volunteers to review the documents, as well as we're also looking for folks that can volunteer to shepherd internet drafts through the RFC publication process. So we really, really need that. And so let's discuss that. So with that, any questions on the agenda? All right, if not, then let's move to the next document. And let's see, a new document is being shared. Okay, Chris has it. Chris, go for it.
I figured I'd press the buttons. All right. Here, I've got another button. All right. This group has expressed an interest in adopting some work that we've received feedback from the inestimable Francesca that we should look carefully at our charter to do. At the last, we presented a proposal at the last IETF, and we had a good discussion on it. And we made some feedback. We got feedback. We made some changes. We put it on the list. There was only a little bit of conversation on the list, but there was some feedback on the list, and we can discuss some of that here as well. Thank you, Alan. But what I'd like to do is fairly briefly simply walk through the charter. I am not going to read all of these slides. I'll give us a few seconds on each slide, and then step up to the mic if we need to back up or have a conversation on something. But my intention is to propose this charter update unless there is significant feedback based on it. All right. This is verbatim. Oh, yes. All of this content is exactly the same as the existing charter, until you see the part that says that there's new stuff. So this is the introduction. All right. All right. It's good to read this stuff anyways. All right. Okay. This section gets into the what we are going to do section. This first one is the requirements document. We've already done this. So likewise, the framework document is completed and published. The request routing redirection interface we have published but continue to refine. Obviously, the FCI and the RRI, clearly both important documents that we continue to refine based on what we have learned. This is the metadata. This is what allows us to define the metadata interface. Note that this. Yes. Note that this metadata interface is fairly broad about what kinds of metadata you can define, but does require that the metadata be relevant to the distribution of the content. That limitation will become relevant shortly. The logging interface, which is work that is currently before us. The control interface. This is similar to the metadata interface. This note that this has a in particular section. The in particular says that our control interface must do this. There are lots of other aspects of control that are clearly necessary for interoperability that exceed that specific requirement. So this is a must, not a only. CDNI URI signing. This document is complete and published. This is the only new text in all of these slides. One of the pieces of feedback that we got at the last IETF was that we really wanted to keep the update pretty narrow. And so that's what we've done here. These two bullet points are the only two ones, are the only two new ones. So I'm going to go ahead and read them. Specification for the CDNI metadata expression language. This document will provide flexible templating language for the specific purpose of describing parameters used in the CDNI metadata interface. This expression language will be for the specific purpose of allowing flexible definition of values. Any feedback on that definition of what we think the metadata expression language is? Glenn?
Yeah, I think I had put a comment in the mailing list adding a clause to that last sentence.
And I did not get that incorporated. I'm going to drop the, let me go pull your comment up.
Yeah, it was allowing flexible definition of values and you could find that.
Yes. Okay.
Something like that.
Yep, here we go. Okay, I'm going to drop this into chat. This is what happens when I try to do stuff outside the context of all right. So that last sentence would say, this expression language will be for the specific purpose of allowing flexible definition of values and evaluation of HTTP request and response headers. Okay.
And the reason that's important is that one of the things we do in the expression language is examine these request and response headers to set metadata about how to process and distribute responses.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Rajiv.
So I just wanted to, give everyone a heads up that we at the SVTA are significantly considering, though it it is definitely isn't something that's decided yet, but we're significantly considering proposals that would introduce the usage of MEL syntax and semantics in places outside the metadata interface. Specifically, we are looking at use cases that could incorporate MEL in the logging interface as well as in the cache management or content management interfaces. So I think we might want to have a little more wriggle room in the definition of what we will do with the MEL eventually.
All right. How about I'm about to post a update 3. This is exactly the conversation I wanted to have here on these couple of sentences. We will. Let me pull up the.
Oh yes, we're already using it in name footprints, like Kevin Ma said. Or at least
so let's
using the semantics and
let's
syntax.
say we'll say CD. I'm going to drop the word metadata. Okay. This is a very good point.
I think that's a good thing to say. Just parameters used in CDNI interfaces, and just leave it there instead of specifying the metadata interface.
Yep. Because we have several. All right.
Let's make sure we capture those in the meeting notes.
Yes, I'm copying them across from the chat into the notes.
Thank you.
Yep. Part of why I'm putting them in the chat. All right. So update. Update a specification for a CDNI metadata expression language. This document will provide a flexible templating language for the specific purpose of describing parameters used in CDNI interfaces. This. Hang on. I munched it up while I'm copying and pasting. Oh, no, I didn't. Still good. This document will provide a flexible templating language for the specific purpose of describing parameters used in CDNI interfaces. This expression language will be for the specific purpose of allowing flexible definition of values and evaluation of content request and response headers. Yoav says in chat, we should update the evaluation of additional variable in addition to content requests and responses. Can you explain that a little bit, Yoav? I don't know if you can pop into the queue or not.
So, Yoav, are you saying that goes on top of what Glenn proposed?
Well, if you can't hear Yoav, I would say, yeah, I think it would be in addition to what I proposed.
Right. I'm not sure what the specific language update that he's looking for is. So, in addition to requests and responses, I'm going to guess Yoav would be on the mic if he could be. So, we should update the evaluation of additional variables.
Okay, let's continue on.
Aha!
Oh, okay.
No, that's just me incorporating that.
Right.
The notes. I just put a copy back in chat for anyone to look at.
So the expression language will be for the specific purpose of allowing flexible definition of values and evaluation of additional variables, for example, in requests and response headers. Yes, that is more. That is better stated.
Yeah.
Does that solve your concern, Rajiv?
Yes, it does. And also I specifically added, for example, in front of content request and response headers, so that we know that that's the primary use case, but that's not the only use case and
Right.
the only scope in which we'll be using it.
Right. What I'm attempting to do is I'm attempting to make sure that it is clear that the purpose and the goal of this is flexible definition, a flexible definition for CDNI, and that we're not just creating a templating language for the purpose of creating a templating language, right? We all right. Kevin is right. It's the prose is stilted here.
Yeah, I would try to stay away from specific, because it just, it might hinder any updates and things that one is thinking about down the road if you start to put that language.
It doesn't actually change that much anyways. Pulling out specific purpose. All right. A specification for a CDNI metadata expression language. This document will provide a flexible templating language for the a flexible templating language for the purpose of describing parameters in CDNI used in CDNI interfaces. This expression language will be to allow flexible definition of values and evaluation of additional variables, for example, in content request and response headers. Rajiv edited it. Thank you. All right, Alan.
Sounds like Chris. Sounds like articulating different text. Like, is there a place I can see that? What's
check chat? It's the latest post from Rajiv in chat.
Chats. 1 sec.
We're hacking on it in real time because we need to have this done, and we basically have all of the people right here that need to work on it.
It's also in the meeting notes. I'm keeping that in sync with what's in chat.
Finding chat tool. Where is the chat? Like, apologies for.
So you should have there's it's the leftmost button at the top.
On the top, the bubble.
Describing parameters. CDNI interfaces. Yeah, I'm actually, I was going to suggest expanding that to CDNI interfaces versus metadata. This is great. Evaluation of values. For example, describing parameters. Kind of, maybe that's. I think it's not clear what describing parameters here is. Purpose of describing parameters.
Well, these are parameters used in CDNI interfaces. So CDNI interfaces has parameters all over the place, right? And we have a plan to use MEL in a fairly wide number of those parameters.
I think it just goes beyond parameter. I think we kind of discussed, but kind of we want to kind of be future kind of compatible. I think in this SVTA we just had a discussion in Arizona around potentially expanding that beyond, I think, the metadata, but also for it may be just dynamic. I'm not sure this parameter is first. It's clear what you really mean by describing parameters.
Well, we pulled out the metadata limitation, right? It's any any parameter inside the CDNI interfaces, which like that really does describe nearly anything.
I think we were going to put this on the mailing list also, and chime in for additional discussions. I think we are probably reaching closer to the allotted 20-minute time.
We are. Yeah, I really like the evaluation of variables. I think that's maybe something that should be pulled up into the purpose. That's just like,
propose text, please.
I'll do that.
Excellent. Yes, likewise, Glenn, propose text. I'm going to blast through the rest of this. It's all the so a specification for the CDNI processing stages metadata. This document will define interfaces for content delivery that require flexible modification or synthesis of content to be delivered. This includes error messages. It's relatively broad, but this line is what allows us for synthesis of content, because the previous all of our previous definitions did not allow for the modification or synthesis of content, only its delivery. And so in order for certain content to be delivered properly, obviously we understand that we need to synthesize it in some particular ways. And the ways that change need to be interchanged.
So Chris, you do have some time because Glenn may not need all his 25 minutes. So
right,
it's okay. Let's just make sure that questions and concerns are addressed here.
Does anyone have any heartburn about the second bullet point? Yes, Alan. Oh, no. That was the first bullet point. Yes. I see no objections to the second bullet point. All right. I am going to, so the rest of the charter text is all the same. Anyone has, these are things that we are not going to do. And I've seen no one claim that we should be doing them. So.
I had a question about out of scope before you move on.
Yes.
The protocols. I think specifically HTTP versions, HTTP 1.1.
Hey, Alan, could you speak up a little bit or increase the volume, because in the room it's not coming out very clear.
I don't know if I can do that. Let's see. Can you hear me or not?
Yeah.
Just to let you know, he sounds fine on remote.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, definition. We'll not define new protocols. I think that the question is, do we include HTTP versions beyond what I think what's currently what's been used is 1x?
We're not defining HTTP. There is an HTTP working group that defines HTTP. This says we will not define the protocol, and we're not.
Right.
We can use the protocols. Nothing prevents us from using them. And we say we will support them, but we will not define them here. We're not going to create a new RTMP or a new RTSP or a new HTTP.
This is not the mock working group.
Understood. I think then the question is kind of when we're saying, and session transport network protocols absolutely makes sense. Agree with that. When we're saying further down, it's saying, for example, new protocols for ingestion of content of metadata between CSP and a CDN. Are we including, for example, CIT interface? Is it considered to be a protocol in this context? Or kind of, because if we say new session transport network protocols, so I think protocol here is too generic. Because sort of if we...
The CDNI framework defines that we are only for interconnecting CDNs. We are not connecting the upstream CDN to the CSP, right? The origin server within CDNI must be in the UCDN. Whatever protocols are used to upload either from the CSP to the UCDN or to pull it are out of scope.
Again, I think it's a nit, but I think kind of the way you describe it, I think in reality, many cases CSPs actually act as the UCDNs. So I think distinction may be lost. So I think suggestion
They are
that
UCDNs.
That's a reasonable observation. Also, note that we're not defining protocols for the ingestion. It is acceptable to describe metadata that simply tells people where, what the upstream is, right? We're not defining the protocol.
Right. If you're using HTTP to grab content from an origin server, we're not defining HTTP. You can go grab that content.
Right.
So I have a quick point I'd like to make over here. So while the charter text is quite clear about us not defining new protocols, the way it's written does not necessarily clearly allow for use of or extending the existing interfaces or standards to use protocols that may be defined elsewhere. Okay, so it's literally like, yeah, while we say no new protocols for Chris, I think we should be back on the protocols page.
Yes, I jumped it forward because it answers the question you're asking. The CDNI working group will work with other IETF working groups to access and, where appropriate, leverage protocols developed by those working groups in order to realize the CDNI requirements in the CDNI interfaces. So there is very specific, clear understanding that we are going to be using and working with the protocols that other IETF working groups have defined.
Okay, so my question here is, do we want to potentially expand that scope to protocols that may not have initially been worked on or developed by IETF working groups?
At the last sentence, the CDNI working group will also coordinate with relevant groups outside the IETF, if and where appropriate.
Okay, so basically this allows us to potentially consider, say, like I said, using a last mile delivery infrastructure that involves MOC, for example, or potentially using an ingest infrastructure that uses a multicast protocol that may not be, at least currently, in IETF.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
We can point to those protocols, and we can talk about how CDNs are going to interchange the information required in order to utilize those protocols, but we will not be defining those protocols themselves. We are hammer users, not hammer makers. And with that, I think we need to bring the end of this charter text to a close. Thank you, Rajiv, for collecting that into the minutes. I will send out an updated charter text to the list, and I will put a timeline on it. We will have probably 2 weeks to make comments on it, and then I will send it to our newly minted AD for the next part of the process. Does our AD have any particular opinions about this conversation?
Hi, Gory Fairhurst. Probably, but still learning. I'm pleased you didn't change the things that are out of scope. It was good to have that discussion, but changing those is a much more substantial change to the charter than I'd be comfortable without talking to. I'd like some indication of how many people have read the final version before you start talking to me about what it contains, just so that I have real confirmation that the group as a whole has seen and accepted that. I like the working here, so let's go ahead and try and make that happen.
And one of the things I'm going to be asking for on the list is I'm going to be asking for people to confirm that they have read and agree to the charter, not just posts about disagreements.
Thank you.
All right, and let's move to our next thing. I believe this is correct. That's you, Glenn.
Yeah, so we can talk through the slide for a moment, and then I'm going to go through, we'll look at the docs and the differences between the current and previous versions of the first 7 of these. It's not as daunting as it seems. And then the final 2 of them there, that's where we'll pivot over, and Arnon and Ben will take each of those because they have some more detailed slides on each of those. But basically, just sort of looking at these docs at the whole list, what we have here is 9 documents. I'm the editor on all of them and the co-author on all of them that originated within the SVTA and what we call the configuration interface, which is the SVTA's sort of take on what was originally the CDNI metadata interface, because we're viewing it not just as metadata that a DCDN fetches from a UCDN saying, hey, how do I route this thing? We view it as also configuration metadata that an upstream CDN can push into a downstream CDN. So thus sort of the change in perspective there, and good to kind of keep that in mind because it colors some of the discussion. We've got 2 of these, the 2 I've got in green, that are really ready to move to working group last call. So Sanjay or Chris, we can kind of talk about it at the end. Those have been stewing for quite a while. We've got 5 of these that are individual drafts still that we'd like to be adopted by the working group. So with that said, I'll kind of switch over. Let me share my screen now, and I'll kind of go through each of these first 7. And we can point out a couple of topics to discuss in each of those. So I should have been share my screen here. And let me see how this works. I'm going to share a whole window. Am I able to do that? Let's see.
You should. It may take a second to appear.
All slots are taken?
Uh,
Oh, wait. Did I do the wrong thing here? Select slides. Hold on a second. Let me try this again. What are you seeing?
A screen share is being started.
Oh, here we go. Now it seems to be working.
We still see just the screen share as being started screen.
I think he's picking the window to share.
Yeah, I'm trying to pick the right window, and it's not. Hold on a second. Sorry. We're going to do entire screen and see if we can pull this off.
It has appeared.
It's here.
All right, good. We'll go with this. Okay, so we're going to go through kind of each of these one by one, and I'll kind of go through a difference of the current version and the previous version, and that'll kind of guide our discussion here. The first one is that the metadata one, in fact, the MEL one. And the biggest difference recently was just a little bit of change in the wording that came back some initial feedback. You can see on the right is the newest version. It just sort of put some context about what MEL is and why. The same sort of stuff we talked about in the charter. And then not much really has changed in this since then, this doc. But in all of the docs, we went through, this was some comments, I think it came from Chris. Whenever now in any of this set of docs where we reference a doc, like on the left here, this SVTA 2032, we've now changed it so we're referencing by the IETF draft. So if I go right down to the bottom here, forgive the scroll, you'll see on the right here, informative references, we're using the proper IETF. So that change has happened in all of these docs. Whenever a doc lives 2 lives as both an SVTA and an IETF doc, we reference it with the IETF reference, all right? I don't think there's anything else to discuss in that document. The next one, the processing stages document, again, Very little differences since the last version. The same thing with the version changes. Oh, and a little bit, I think there was a comment in some early review that we should reference RFC 9110 for HTTP semantics, since we've done that. And I can tell you almost nothing else has changed here except a minor clarification here or there, but really nothing significant to talk about. I'll pause there for a second. Is this a good way to do this? Is kind of highlight through anything that I think is significant that folks should look at? Does that work for you guys?
Probably going to need to move a little bit faster.
Okay.
A detailed review is going to have to happen off the list.
Of course. I just want to give people kind of a pointer at what they should look at. The cache control one, this is one that really is ready for working group last call. Not again, just some very minor wording changes here that were requested, so nothing to talk about much there. This one here. Oh yeah. So this one here, the source access control, there were a set of parameters added here to define SNI, to give some more flexibility using the metadata expression language in new ways to set up SNI, examination of SNI setups for caching. So folks can help themselves and look there if they want. Again, nothing else significant. The client access control doc, I wanted to talk about this a little bit because there's two big things that are in here that are worth talking about. The first one, this touches on the point we just had in the charter. Here's an example where in RFC 8006 that defined a protocol registry, and all that was there was HTTP 1 and 1.1. So now here we've proposed these commonly used specifications or names for H2 and H3. And so we have those in here. But again, we're not defining new protocols. We're just defining ways to reference existing protocols. And then the other big change here, and I think Rajiv, you're looking at this now, and Chris is going to take a look at this. Since the CTA Wave published the CAT, the access authentication, we now have a set of metadata objects in here to set the delivery metadata configurations that use the CAT token. So that's very important to get looked at. Okay, plowing through the next draft here we had, where am I? Hold on one second. I'm going to catch my place. Client access control. Yep. Yes, we talked through the CAT stuff. The next one here is, again, minor differences here in the edge control, specifying, instead of coming up with arbitrary names for patterns, specifying references to pattern definitions that already existed in 8006. Nothing else major there really at all. And then the final one we're looking at, this delivery metadata. This has gotten almost no review really from the metadata from the working group. We really would like this adopted and have some detailed review on this one. The most recent changes in it really are around adding some metadata definitions for multicasting. This is some work going on within the SVTA, and there is now an FCI object and some additions to describe delivery metadata when the downstream CDN is using multicasting. So folks interested in multicasting would want to get a look at that. That kind of wraps up my little tour of these docs. We want to get eyeballs on these. We want to get those 5 that are individual drafts adopted as working group drafts, and we want to get the 2 that are slated for last call to get moving forward. That's it for me.
And as you contemplate this list and think carefully about it, think carefully about whether some of these documents could benefit from you as a shepherd.
So I'll just jump in as an individual. I will review the 2 documents, edge control and the cache control, and put out the comments after my review. And I also encourage others to review also and put comments, and then hopefully that will take us to the point that we make working group last call. And in terms of the time frame, I'm going to do that review as soon as I can, in terms of hopefully before the end of March. So my comments would be in, and our goal is to really make sure that we don't just lose time on because we are not reviewing it. So I do want people to review it as soon as they can, so that we can at least put the working group last call now and much before we meet in July.
I see Rajiv.
Yes, so I'm putting my hand up. I'm currently doing a review of the client access control document, and I hope to get that done in the next couple of weeks, and will post my comments in the mailing list.
Sorry, and I should have also said one more thing, that the other drafts, which are individual drafts, so we do need folks to review it, put their comments out. That really helps the chairs to make sure that the document is being reviewed in the community, and that we have some feedback on the documents, and that helps us call for the adoption in the working group. So Rajiv, appreciated you doing this, and others also, please review the drafts, which are individual drafts, and that will help chairs to decide and move on to for the adoption. Okay, I think Arnan, you're next.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah, it's dark, but it's already morning. This slide actually tries to recap the discussions we had in the mailing lists and map the questions and the agreement and disagreements. Initially, about the motivation to have the private features at all. This is something that we as we work the SVTA spec, we found it to be extremely productive in speeding up the collaboration, and we have I think actual examples of stuff that started as a private feature to start working with it, and in the pipeline made it to be an official feature. About the need to encapsulate it inside a private feature, this is also, I think, maybe from the technical point of view of how you manage the parsing of the configuration. We felt it made it very easy and to remain inside the same structure that allows the objects to be validated, and add another degree of freedom to the must revalidate that you could that different entities could relate to this flag differently de facto. And about the concerns that were about this that the private features are out of band. We still consider them to be published, but not by the SVTA. So it's like a two-head source that eventually combines the into one for each of the downstream CDNs. There was one more a concern raised by Kevin after this slide was ready, and that this concerns the last bullet about organization ID being outside of IANA, and I personally think that we could even use PEN numbers for the organization ID, and actually use this part as an identifier for the organization, because this part has a much lower pace than the top bullet about being able to speed up the collaboration. So if the features themselves are being defined privately, and the organization ID is managed by IANA, so I think we're still not creating a totally out of band registry. That's
I think we have Kevin and Chris on the queue here. So, Kevin.
Yeah, as an individual, I'm not understanding how it speeds up collaboration, right? It's creating an envelope, and an unnecessary extra envelope, right? If you can put it in a feature ID and a feature type, I don't know why you can't just put it in a metadata name. And I don't see how that improves collaboration. You still need to know how to parse it. And if you're exchanging that information out of band, that's fine. Nothing prevents you from doing that in CDNI. But it doesn't make it any more interoperable, right? You still have to know. And if you don't know it, you can ignore it, which is already supported by CDNI metadata. I just don't see how this adds anything other than more bytes to the wire.
The way I see it is that it reduces the red tape, the latency of the red tape. I can say that the time it took us to bring the feature to SVTA and make it a formal one, add it to the document, and as a feature which is supposed to be a feature in the common use, while initially it is born in some cases from a specific functionality that is not necessarily broad. You could even have private features which don't have any impact on any other CDN than the one who defined them.
That's fine. That doesn't preclude you from using the CDNI metadata interface. You can define anything you want. It's just, you don't even have to register it in IANA if you don't want to. If you want it to be interoperable, you should write a spec and you should register it with IANA. If you don't, you're free to use it still. You don't need private features for that. Just pick a name, as long as it doesn't collide with an existing piece of metadata, which hopefully it won't. You can still advertise it. You can still use it. You don't have to come here to this working group to register anything. You can, even if you want to register IANA, you don't have to come here. Right?
That's a piece, Kevin, that I'm not sure is well understood. Is that specification does not mean RFC required, right? Specification required just means somebody out there needs to have a specification. I've seen specification required depending on the group. Specification required is often satisfied by a specification on a GitHub repo.
Yeah,
I mean, go look at the CBOR registry.
And the only requirements for the reviewers, I know because I wrote this, I created the registry, and I am the reviewer, is that it has to not be gratuitous and it has to not break interoperability, right? Otherwise, we'll say, okay, fine, register it. Just like registering a new media type, right? There are lots of media types. Anyone can register one if they want, any company, any individual. So the same goes here for metadata. And so I don't understand why we need private features, I guess, still.
I think let's hear from, we've got a queue building up here. So let's hear from, Chris, do you have any other points to make? Oh, Chris is out. All right.
That was the main point I wanted to make. Kevin made most of the other points that I was going to make.
And Kevin, we can always come back, but let's hear what Alan and then Glenn have to say.
I actually want to voice very similar sentiment. Like I struggled with the need, and I kind of cannot find a parallel of other frameworks where you actually standardize private features. This is not, I think if you kind of provided some framework that allowed you kind of to negotiate those features and then, or kind of, but this is not that. It's just basically, I think it's gratuitous. It's not something that I fail to see a need for that. And then kind of the explanations here didn't help me understand it better.
Glenn?
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, well, I may have been the one who came up with the idea in the first place before Arnon ran with it. But, you know, I think, right, of course you can whip up all the generic metadata MI objects you want and go crazy. Part of our rationale, I think, at least within the APIs that we have within the SVTA to work with these things, we wanted to have a controlled set of MI objects because we have open API YAML definitions that are defining the MI objects that you can support, and having the MI objects that define private features kind of gave us a convenient wrapper for a world of private features, all standardized within an MI object. And then within FCI, there's ways of describing it. So yeah, maybe we just shuffled the chairs around and moved the problem, but it gave us that controlled set of MI objects, which I think had some importance. I don't know, Arnon, you want to chime in on that? That's part of this, right?
Yeah, I think it's part of that. I think it also, as you try to make your way in a pile of, I think it's still tens of different MI objects. I also like the separation that you don't throw them all into one big repository when the scope of them could be temporary in some cases and specific in other cases. So you just maintain a separation of some of the features are in transit and end up as being an official private feature. It's like I'm not finding the right word. Like a path that you need to move in order to be baptized as a.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sandbox for these things that may be experimental, temporary. You can say, yeah, I support this whole set of MI objects. These private features, well, they're in a world of, I don't even know what those things are. I might support them, I might not.
Again, you don't have to register them in IANA. You can still use them. I think we discussed this originally. This may be, if you wanted a SVTA wants its own registry, I don't think as CDNI we should be endorsing separate registries outside of IANA. We chose to create an IANA registry. That's where all the official ones that we, are standardizing go. If you want to have your own registry, you totally can. And you could totally register a new metadata type that is SVTA wrapper for metadata, and that would be fine. But as a working group, I'm not sure how this fits into the CDNI architecture.
All right.
Yoav is also. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Chris.
the queue is being weird. It puts the chairs at the top of the queue, no matter if we lower our hand and try to go back to the end of the line. I think it's my turn at this point. Yeah. So one of the things I'm observing here is that we have a similar situation to what the it has happened with HTTP headers, right? So HTTP headers used to have a convention where they would start the header with X for experimental, right? And people would create experimental private headers and exchange them and whatnot. And that was considered best practice for a long time, right? By putting an X in there, you'd make sure that you didn't conflict with anything. Well, the problem is that we would get deployment, we'd have interoperability with these X headers, and then we'd want to standardize them. And it was a problem. So I think you're likely to have the same situation here. It might be less bad because there are fewer CDNs in the world than there are browsers, but you still have the same problem. Somebody creates a private feature. It's really cool. It's great. You standardize it. Your employer publishes the specification on their website because it's a really cool standard that uses their product. And then you submit the request to register it. That is totally fine, and that works great. That's the standard That's the registry operating as intended. If you put that exact same thing in a private features place, then everywhere that was using it in the private features would then have to go update their implementations in order to go to use the now official version, right? And that's bad. We want when we standardize it, we want that to work with the existing implementations. So I think it's better and more interoperable if you just go make your own things, and then if and when you have a standard and you want to ask us to reserve a point for it, you ask for the code point and you get it.
Yeah.
Now I think it's Yoav's turn.
Yeah, I see the value of private features, I guess, in this context, mainly of actually having a definition for the private feature is to allow a mechanism that will prevent two different organizations defining the same and conflicting on the same private feature definition, because having the same structure but actually different meanings would be very harmful and would just not work, especially if upstream CDN wants to use one definition for the configuration that will fit all downstreams. That might create conflicts. So I think that's the main value here. In terms of moving from a private implementation to a standardized implementation, actually, I think that's the right approach, because assuming that the definition didn't change, so it's easy to make that transition. And if the definition has changed, because as part of the standardization, you're taking into consideration additional feedback or additional use cases, then anyway you need to change your implementation, and it's actually you have more control when a certain definition of metadata moves from private to the standardized one. So I think that's actually the right way to do it, and we would like to avoid conflicts and allow the upstream CDN to use in the same definition of a configuration the private features of multiple downstream CDNs and avoiding conflicts.
When you say conflict, you just mean name conflict.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Glenn?
Yeah, I was just going to add, look, I think we should aim towards, I suppose, a vote or a decision on this, but I'm starting to think, let's drop this from CDNI. Remember, this whole set of documents I presented, including this one from Arnon and the next one that Ben's going to present, these are all mirrors of SVTA documents, and this thing is going to live in the SVTA as private features, and SVTA members will do with it what they want. And if we feel it's inappropriate for the CDNI standard, that's fine. I mean, it's really, I don't think we need to make that big an issue out of it. And I understand the points you guys are making about it being redundant. You're probably right. And I think we should probably just drop it. And we'll keep it living and breathing for all the reasons that folks like Arnon and Yoav has said within the SVTA. What do you think?
I think the SVTA is very welcome to request a metadata interface object. The SVTA publishes specs. We can point to those just fine. I concur with that. I have more thoughts if people were going to continue to develop on this, but if the feeling is that that we should dispatch this to the SVTA, then I won't take any more of our time.
I agree. I think that, and if the SVTA would like to register it, they certainly can. I'm just not sure it makes sense for the CDNI working group to do this.
Yeah, so I think definitely. I personally think it's if there's a merit for it, there's a merit for it both in both organizations. And as I described, I think that there is value in real world implementations to allow adding specific features for a specific vendor and making sure that there's no conflicts. At the end of the day, part of it is really we want this, in order to have this used by more and more upstream CDNs, we should allow it to be simple and allow them to have one configuration for all downstream CDNs. And this mechanism allows it, and avoiding conflicts or having such configuration being wrongfully rejected because such metadatas are inappropriately being evaluated by downstream CDNs.
And again, SVTA can register the metadata type. I don't see anything particularly wrong with it. As a reviewer for IANA, I don't see why I would reject it. And I would be fine if proven wrong a year from now and everybody's using it and it's the greatest metadata that's been introduced. But yeah, it's not clear to me at this point that's work that we should take on. But again, that's a question for consensus of the working group. It's not me saying that as an individual or as a chair.
I believe that multiple vendors are using it.
So I think the question for the chairs here is, how do we move forward? I don't hear consensus in the room. I don't think we're going to get consensus, though. I think we may just have disagreement.
Do we vote or did the chairs decide?
Neither of those are actually good options. We can do a poll, though. We can at least do a poll and get a sense of the room. maybe some see the hands of people who didn't come to the mic with their voices.
I think if we go for the poll, we should probably consider that we need to be careful of what we are polling for. Should we create a draft or not? Create a draft would maybe a wrong question, but maybe do we think that there should be a case for this to be registered, INA registry, or should we consider this a draft? So I think we just have to be careful of what we want to ask.
Might I
Sorry,
propose that we specifically ask whether this feature should be something that is taken up as a core CDNI working group activity, or should it live elsewhere if it lives?
Yeah, more
I think
specifically, should this draft be taken into the working group, or should it not be? And if SVTA chooses to register MI private features object, we can go ahead and do that. I think that's kind of those two choices, right?
Yeah, I think this is an adoption call question.
Right. Once adopted, the working group gets to decide what actually ends up in this document.
Right.
And we can refine it. But is it something we want to work on is the question. So I started a show of hands. I went with, is private feature something CDNI should adopt? The wording may not be perfect, but I think we've, through this discussion, all understand what that means. It's a dead heat.
So we have Gory coming up to the mic.
Voted.
Okay, so Gory first here. This doesn't look like we have consensus to do it to me. A dead heat means you don't know. So do the people who said no want to say more? Because to me, this doesn't look like we yet have consensus. So why do people say no?
I mean, I think we just heard a number of the arguments for no at the microphone. Personally, I'm one of the no votes with no hats on, of course. I think that CDNI is not improved by private features, and I think that the existing mechanisms for simply, doing things without telling the IETF that you're doing them works just fine.
Same. Yeah.
But obviously, at least 5 people or at least 4 people disagree with me, and that's okay.
If you want to talk more, that's okay. But I didn't see the consensus at this moment in the room to do this, so that would be my input.
Yeah. So I think what we have, and I really appreciate your guidance here, Gory. I think what I'm hearing in the room is that the document as it stands, and really the idea of the document doesn't have consensus for adoption in this working group. I would encourage the authors of the draft to send a specification to the designated expert. Hi, Kevin. And register code point as they desire and is useful to them. Or if you want to continue iterating on this draft and see if you can continue to maybe turn it into something that does have broader appeal, then we can do that as well. That's an option available to you as well. And so we would send it back to the authors and say we don't have a consensus for this work at the moment. And I would follow up with. I really appreciate the good discussion that we've had on this. It's difficult when we can't come to an agreement on something. And there was no way to walk out of this conversation without somebody being disappointed. I think that does bring us to the end of this particular conversation. And so we are now back on schedule. We will now move to protected secrets. Many thanks to those who have presented. Aha. You got to the slides before I did.
Yeah, hoping that works and I'm able to actually press the button to advance the slides if I request to share. If I can just choose the correct one. Yep, here we go. Excellent.
That's excellent.
All right. So protected secrets. This is going to be quick because the changes are brief. So the primary change is the encoding of the fields that contain both secret values and certificates. So the prior drafts had a vague reference that they should be base64 encoded, without elaborating. So rather than that, and have a more formal definition, I also moved it now to define those fields to use PEM encoding as specified in 7468, but maintaining backwards compatibility because they're essentially the same format. It's just the PEM encoded fields have a boundary, a pre-encapsulation and post-encapsulation boundary, and that's like that dash, begin certificate. I have an example on the next slide. So it's fairly simple change, but it formalizes the definition of those fields. So that's the primary change. I think there are a couple other just like minor textual like little typo fixes, but this was the real change in the draft. So if we go to slide 3 here, this is just an example of how this changed, and you can see that it's a very minor change. So it's just really clarifying the text and make it simple and going towards a more standard format for transmission of certificates. I'm sure everyone is familiar with seeing something like this. So where does that leave this draft? I think the draft is basically complete. I know, Chris, you gave a thorough review, and I hope I've addressed all of the issues you've raised. I'll have to go through again and make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't believe anyone else, however, has reviewed the draft on the mailing list. So and because of that, I don't want to ask for last call when it's had only a single person responding to it. So what I'd like to do is target that we'll ask for last call at next IETF. And in the interim, if we can get some of the rest of you who are on this call or in the room, all of you who are subscribed to the mailing list, to please look through the draft. Expert reviewers are fantastic. You don't have to be an expert in this to review the draft. There are other things to review other than just the technical accuracy of the specific things that it's doing. So I think anyone who can do a read through your contribution would be appreciated. But so that being said, once we get some reviews, I do plan to ask for last call at next IETF or just prior on the mailing list. So that's the update. I also wanted to very briefly touch on the logging draft, which has not seen any real update in a while. It just got a touch update to bump the expiration date. But there are a bunch of us who are working on a new draft with substantial changes, including custom fields, which will come to that draft. So that will hopefully be ready prior to the next IETF. And at that point, I think we can discuss the timeline and future of that draft as well. I think that's it for me.
Is that draft going to have a forward reference on Mel?
That the changes with custom fields will not. We're talking about doing filtering, however, which would have a dependency on Mel.
Okay, that's going to affect publication timeline, but I think as long as we produce the best documents we can, that's what we want to do.
Okay. Any questions from anyone else? Oh, all right. Well, that's it for me.
So I don't have a question, but real quick here that the other one of your other draft, which is in the editor's queue, I see that it's in the edit icon next to it. So maybe Gori may have better insight as to what that means, but it sounds like it's actively considered for updates. So hopefully,
I think it's
not
been
too
in
long.
that state for a few weeks now, though. And I haven't received any messages. I can double check in Data Tracker, but as far as I'm aware, there's been no response requested from me yet on anything related to editing of that draft.
Yeah. So Gori, this is the CDNI capacity capability advertisement extension document, which is in the editor's RFC editor's queue.
Okay, I haven't found the document. I can look. Edit is the general term, which means that the RFC editor will edit. So this is the one where you're in wait mode, but they call it edit mode because they're editors. So that state can remain for a while, and the substate next will be the exciting one.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.
All right. Thank you.
And Alan, you can request to control the slides if you wish, or you can just press say next and I'll hit a button.
How do I do request? Ask to share screen, no. Ask slides, is that that?
I believe that's correct.
Does it work? Okay. Yep.
There we go.
No, okay. Just choosing the right document. Yep. Wonderful. Right. So this is an update on the triggers draft. That's actually where most of my focus has been since IETF 121. So here is the update. So Jay and I worked on getting the draft 16 together. Here is like a brief outline what was changed in it. We published version 16. Just looking back, kind of recapping where we are with the drafts and updates. I think there's a batch of updates that started kind of with the goal of kind of merging in the work that got started at the cache management interface document at SVTA, which influenced, I think, significantly this document. And I think this is like a third draft we're publishing as a result. And it seems like to be the last one that I think the changes and reviews and that everything that kind of like gets major updates with myself and Jay kind of taking the pen on that. Kind of that's the last one. I think kind of we said what we wanted to say. So I think that kind of you'll see that next step will be an ask for review. So what changed? A document of this age, right? This document started, I think, 8 years ago. So there's kind of, you go through this as sort of like reading through Bible revisions. There's some text layers of text that you go into, and there's repeated spelling and grammatical errors. Some of them old, some of them introduced by us. So there's some of that all the time. Kind of, and I'll go to the rest of them just with every slide. But here is a brief kind of. There's a review from Brett Mertens that provided some feedback on draft 15, I believe. Then there's some updates on support for conditional requests if modified since last modified responses kind of introduced in a better way. Format of URLs. So some we introduced UID before into examples and cleaned up the domain names. So these are kind of minor formatting editing changes. I think two significant changes, and I'll cover them. There will be requirements to match configuration and review of what we call legacy areas, kind of the some of the areas of the document that really were started, I think, 8 years ago with a bit of different concept of interconnection. And I think we need kind of sort of everybody else edited portions they cared about. This portion sort of nobody really pursued. So, but we felt that it needed to be revised and reviewed, and indeed there was some changes. So the extended examples and refactoring, refiltering collections, that's sort of the scope. I'll cover them in the next slides. Brett's feedback kind of, there was, I think one feedback was that in triggers, there are kind of multiple combinations in how the spec and the action could be combined, and not all of them are valid. So for example, if you are using CCID spec, which is kind of passing content collection ID, you cannot use it for preposition because it only works on objects that already exist in that. So that's invalid. So not all combinations work. Kind of in, for first reading of this, it's not clear what is what. We just added the section based on Brett's comment that actually introducing specific combinations of what explicitly is allowed and what is not a valid combination. There was an example also kind of, again, a leftover of, we could use this to purge content acquired in the last X hours. It's actually not a real capability that we support. There's no way to indicate kind of what trigger kind of any time limits on what content objects or metadata should be applied to. So just removed, editing. Also, a bit of streamlining of the structure. There was like a special data type. We maintain in a trigger 3 types of timestamps, and we maintain 3 composite data types, which really is just one basic data type. So that was kind of streamlining that made sense. And I think Brett was asking a specific kind of quilt implementation in mind that kind of in some cases, DCDN may require additional information beyond the standard one to identify the configuration section. So sort of just passing the host name is not enough. You need to pass some sort of additional site ID, which is kind of sort of private feature in a different sense. How could we do that? And I think the response has been that one way that parties can agree to do so is to use the labels mechanism, which we introduced. I think it was in draft 14 or 15, adding trigger labels. So UCDN, when creating a trigger, can now create a set of key value pairs and pass them to the DCDN, and UCDN and DCDN can agree to parse those labels as additional metadata attributes. And they can be used for purpose of actually matching configuration to a trigger. And there is a section for that for 414. So that's a quick overview on Brett's feedback and how we responded to that. Conditional request. So draft 15, we introduced the notion that conditional requests could use both types of conditional requests, so if modified since based on date and ETAG, if not match. But there we wrote it up, but didn't have examples for that. So kind of examples for conditional requests have that. You can see here it's like there is a request, and it has both conditionals and actually both responses here. So there's last modified and new tag. So just supporting the spec with examples. And generally, I don't have a slide for that, but Jay and I went over the whole set of examples and made sure that all the key features that got added actually are properly and adequately covered in the example section. So that got expanded significantly. And then all of them actually are valid requests. So the timestamps match and kind of there's all kind of minutia around actually making them valid kind of requests and responses. There is that. No, I jumped one too many. So we earlier said that we want to that we recommending a use of UIDv4 for triggers identification to make them unique. Previously, examples didn't support that. They were using sequential numbers. So triggers as a result could be potentially there can be collision. Now all examples I use the UIDv4. Was a bit of a challenge with the width of the document. So these are kind of really long strings. So we had to actually change the default prefix of the URL so that would fit into the strict limits of the XML. So as a result, you see that there was like your prefix is just /CIT. So it was as short as practical. And also we used a separate hostnames for examples. Kind of previously, all examples use example.com for both UCDN and DCDN, potentially creating a wrong suggestion that they can belong to the same organization. So now we're using another standard domain name .example for DCDN. So when you kind of DCDN.example and everything that comes from UCDN, any reference to URL on the UCDN side are using example.com. So more clarity, right? Now to, I think, to real stuff, right? So real, I think, important changes. To maybe short down this a bit, kind of, and disallow various, I think, loopholes, and they are related to my next slide, which is going to talk about the diamond configuration. We now asking that DCDN kind of matches the incoming trigger with existing configuration metadata. So, and I'm referring to core metadata objects like host index, host match, host meta, and so on. That belongs to the same UCDN. Again, the particular applies to prepositioning. So we want to disallow prepositioning of content objects to a hostname that is really not published and DCDN does know how to serve and deliver. So that's first. But even if that's something that is, if you're trying to purge something that doesn't exist, also I think it's better to reject it explicitly and say, hey, you're trying to purge, a hostname that I don't know anything about, as opposed to just say I did nothing, which is kind of suggests that there's no error, just no objects were found. So there is an ask for specifically match the triggers. And again, when we think about triggers, we mostly think about content, but we should also think about metadata objects just as well. So if metadata objects are such that do not match existing, so if you didn't create host index MI, you should probably reject any ingestion of any MI data object other than that. So first do this and then come to me with additional metadata you want to ingest. And again, just a reminder, right, is that we're mostly thinking about metadata interface as the main way to do this, but actually CIT is also and kind of a way to ingest metadata. So this principle should apply. And so kind of, and this is formulated in a way that kind of is not too narrow, but says that you must be able to match the kind of incoming objects, content objects and metadata objects to existing metadata. Additional implication of this is that the content objects are really isolated by tenant. So if I'm matching content objects to configuration that belongs to the same UCDN, So it wouldn't be possible for one UCDN to place objects in the cache that would be then potentially used and picked up by somebody else's configuration. So that's kind of enforcing strict isolation and multi-tenancy. Related to this is the diamond configuration, right? So the initial CDNI architecture, I think, envisioned complex topologies, right? So there's it's seen in the core RFCs, is actually seen in the CIT, that there's a kind of significant part of that is spent talking about propagation of, let's say, features and extensions, the CITV2 draft, how trigger extensions are propagated on those chains, and how kind of the loops should be detected, and so on and so forth. These are not something that are really, I think, of practical concern to many. I wouldn't say to all, but like it's not really a practical important use case. I think we're seeing some chaining that happens, right? But I think a little kind of, some sort of loops are for kind of really far in between. But just sort of as a background commentary, specifically, the diamond configuration kind of allowed for same trigger to travel from UCDN A1 in the diagram to DCD, as an example, to DCDN C1 in more than one route. So it would be possible for same trigger to travel, for example, directly or through an intermediary, or potentially kind of, so multiple paths can exist on a graph leading from kind of A1 to C1. And the spec previously said that in this case, those kind of both triggers should be processed, right? And that the DCDN should be ready and capable to process both the kind of same trigger basically coming from different sources. This actually leads to race conditions, because sort of you can have, if you're treating the same trigger, those triggers equally, you may have an update, or even, for example, purge and invalidate coming faster, for example, on the direct path, but then arriving later from on the intermediary or any way around, which can create basically kind of unexpected results, both in terms of delivery configuration or content operations. So I think the desire is to kind of remove ambiguities like this, and to disallow publishing overlapping delivery configuration. I think that the real reliable way to deal with this is basically to separate triggers, right? So the trigger that comes from A1 should be applicable to only to configuration published by A1, and should not be and kind of, so if there's ownership of the metadata, right? So triggers should be separated and shouldn't be sharing.
Do you want questions now or at the end?
I'd rather have it now. Yeah.
Okay.
So just to confirm, you had mentioned the tenancy point previously. So in this case, when B1 is the upstream for C1, even if it is propagating A1's content, in this case, the same content will exist twice in C1, once from A1, once from B1. And therefore the triggers should only affect those specific pieces of content, correct? Even it may be the exact same file, but it's based on who you got it from.
Yes, more specifically, we should disallow, and that's sort of really not trigger kind of conversation maybe, but more of configure kind of actually metadata conversation, that we should not allow same requests match more than one delivery configuration. C1 should reject, like if you have example.com/video path match already existing from A1, B1 shouldn't be able to publish configuration, however it does it, versus triggers or the metadata interface. So it should not be situation when you have requests can match multiple delivery kind of multiple configurations belonging to different UCDNs. So if
Okay.
we honor that, and this is not really in the domain, like it goes beyond, I think, triggers, I think this kind of adding this achieves the separation and isolation.
Okay. And so it's not just that we're not just getting rid of diamond, we've changed it such that the thing at issue with the diamond no longer occurs, therefore it's safe to do.
Correct. Yes. So as long as these are separate, for example, and again, we don't necessarily talk about this, right, in the chaining and kind of that B1 could be potentially changing the triggers, right, but it could be passed as is. The way it was written, the same trigger passed as is from A1 to C1, right? If you have identical triggers arriving from two different UCDNs, that's an error that leads to mistakes and should be prohibited. If B1 rewrites it in a way that makes it its own, right? So it's actually no longer a one trigger, it's B1 trigger, they're separate and no problem.
Got it. Thank you.
Sanjay?
Sanjay here, as an individual, just to clarify that this change does in any way impact if you have cascaded delegation, so you have a chain of delegation from upstream CDN to downstream CDN1, and then downstream CDN1 is an upstream CDN to a downstream CDN2.
So chaining, there's no problem with chaining, right? So if you kind of, if you take actually the example on the diagram on the slide, there's no problem with A1 going to B1 to C1. This normal, it should kind of actually happens in real life, as we know, right? So the problem is that if you're saying that A1, right, going to C1 in two routes at the same time. So if one DCDN at the bottom of the chain has two different UCDNs, B1 and A1, if they are sending identical triggers, that creates all kinds of race conditions and so on. So the chain by itself, no problem, but if you're allowing multiple paths from A1 to C1 and you are passing identical object, you're creating race and be creating overlapping delivery config. That's no. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so this is that. Yeah, so no, sorry, I just jumped over a slide. Yes, so the last change that we refactored the filter collection, right? So filter kind of what is the topic kind of so as part of the interface, DCDN maintains a special object called trigger collection. So triggers are RESTful objects that are created by UCDN, and UCDN creates, modifies, deletes, and cancels them. Or in some cases, it can be when they are kind of completed, they can be also expired by DCDN. But generally, that's a life cycle that's actually triggered by UCDN doing something. That's kind of typical REST objects. Kind of a client creates a resource and goes through its life cycle. Collection is sort of it's an object that's created by DCDN. So DCDN, as a service to DCDN, maintains a collection of all triggers. And this is kind of usually the root URI. So when you ask, if you're contacting the interface, you're receiving what you see on the slide on the right. This is kind of an example in the draft of how that collection could look like. And collection actually normally includes all existing triggers. As well as what was called earlier filter collection, which is a way to get a subset, right? I only want to receive those triggers that are currently active. I only want to see those that are currently pending. I want to see triggers with particular label. And in draft 15, they were described as actually distinct objects by themselves, and there was some kind of object definition and such and so on. We refactor that actually to be a representation of the root object, because really then there's one object that DCDN has to maintain, and UCDN may ask for representation. Hey, DCDN, provide me this representation that filters by this parameter, which kind of simplified the spec. So right now there's just one definition, and these supported representations are published. So you when you're retrieving the collection, you actually can see what are the currently available filter representations are. And there's collection state array, right? And it has a format. So there's a parameter, so you can hit state, or you can do a call state that you can create filters by ask for filters by state. And we asking for all states to be available. So you can, for any trigger state, you can ask for the filter. And to the labels will be reflective of all the labels unknown. So DCDN says, hey, I know about these labels, these trigger labels, and you can ask me about these labels. And there's just one label. An example is a type media. So, hey, show me that. And the request looks like basically when you're requesting a collection, you're requesting CIT state / pending and so on and so forth. So just using RESTful semantics to simplify the kind of taxonomy of objects. So we ended up with having only 2 objects. From previous, there was like various kind of commands, responses, and so on. The draft came to a point where we have a trigger object and we have trigger collection object. And everything else that you want to be, it will be some form of representations of each. This is that, right? So as far as next steps, kind of please review. Kind of that's a massive document, right? So certainly would benefit for more eyes on it. I think we're almost at 100 pages now, and kind of with that, we want to move to kind of to last call sometime before the next IETF or at the next IETF. Kevin?
110 according to data tracker, but I didn't get to it before this evening, but it is on my list. I do plan to review it in the next couple of weeks, so you can put me down for that, Rajiv.
I hope, Rajiv, you got that.
Already being added in the notes.
Okay.
And I think, Alan, you are also next with the named footprints when you want to.
Yes, and I'll make it short because there's not a lot of updates. So really, there may be updates because of the other updates happening in the group. So probably a couple of minutes.
Alan, you picked up comments that Kevin posted on it, right?
On the named footprints.
On the CDNI named footprint, I saw comments posted by Kevin.
Yeah, I sent some to the list the other day. Yeah.
So I didn't see them. I'll take a look at them.
That's fine. We can discuss it here.
Okay. So just a quick recap, right? So it's really something that, like the same slides I presented the last session. Again, I kind of proceeded with the draft, and draft actually quite old because it was initial individual draft and got adopted, and so it sort of requires refreshment, frankly, right? But as I progressed with that, I realized that we have a problem, that actually this kind of draft has sort of in the back, kind of in memory, basically it has a view of using the RESTful FCI interface that is in use by SCTA, which actually does not exist in IETF. So there's no kind of RESTful FCI interface that kind of exists in CDNI. And we kind of, in CTA, kind of think in this forum, we'll also discuss various ways to proceed. And I think what got decided is that that there will be a separate draft will be introduced, and Guillaume is going to take a lead on that. kind of present a set of various SVTA RESTful interfaces, and we are talking about bootstrapping, FCI configuration, which is actually same as metadata interface, and cache management, which is something that I oversaw at SVTA. But they're describing just a kind of the interface framework for that. And that will reference the name footprints. So name footprints will remain as a place where we define just some metadata. So we kind of saying, well, we're going to define and publish a way actually to work with these footprint objects, sort of in the way that CIT v2 is an interface definition, but otherwise, I think we don't have a definition like that. I think we want to have them. And once there's a place, kind of, then I think that kind of we have a complete picture. That will require, and that was something that I think we kind of discussed at SVTS and with Sanjay's knowledge that's how we want to proceed with that. Yes, Kevin.
So I guess that's the part that I'm a little confused about. Is what you're proposing a new interface for advertising footprints, or?
Okay, let me take a step back. No. So what we want to do is to basically to have a new interface, or to have a definition of footprint capability interface, which is FCI, right? And in its kind of an FCI in a CTA world right now, there's well-defined RESTful interface, which addresses the C in the FCI. It addresses capabilities and footprints in that spec, that CTA FCI spec, are kind of dependent attributes. So basically, in the way that the current FCI works, is that it publishes capabilities and then qualifies them with particular footprints, which are not addressable. They're not named. Unlike, for example, in Alto, you have actually persistent naming of footprints that are just Alto IDs, right? But in the CTA spec, which is not Alto-based, footprints became sort of, second-class citizens. What we want to do is to extend that FCI to have separate way to retrieve footprints using REST semantics, right? So you can actually then be able to say be able to retrieve various footprints from FCI, and actually retrieve individual footprints from FCI. If there is like US footprint, what it is, I can get it. Or what are the footprints that you publish, so on. So you can do that. So this is a work that is not named footprints graph. This is kind of the thing. What we want to do is to have a separate FCI spec, right, that will cover kind of interface. And the way I want to move forward with this spec is actually focus on metadata object definition only, with the idea that we will have a definition of ways to retrieve them.
Okay. And that's basically what my email was about. Like the definition of new footprint types and giving them names, that all made sense to me. The rest of it on the advertisement piece was a little muddled, and I couldn't really figure out where that was going. But if we're going to separate those out, I'm good with that. I'm happy with that. And then we can discuss, what we want to do with FCI, how we want to augment it or modify it. I agree that should be a separate document.
Okay.
So then
yeah,
I think we're on the same page there.
Yes, sounds good.
Thanks.
Rajiv?
This was basically just to bring out the fact that there's a lot of other potential changes to FCI that are under discussion, not just with regards to named footprints, but I think we probably will need to have some discussions about FCI itself as a core interface, because if my understanding is right, FCI was kind of defined very early in the CDNI standards work, and then a lot of other things came in after that, but there hasn't been much time spent going back and looking at whether FCI has kept pace with a lot of other things. So I would strongly suggest that we keep some time aside to look at FCI in more detail and see where it needs to be updated.
FCI doesn't exist in kind of, and I'm
Yeah.
intentionally kind of, FCI in the interface doesn't exist in CDNI. So
Correct.
FCI, the CDNI today doesn't define, so the only interface that we have defined so far is CIT, the triggers in CDNI. The other interface that you know quite well from a 3TA as RESTful, well-defined interfaces, they do not exist in CDNI. And I think we want to bring them here, right? That's a need to actually, there's what's simple configuration interface, again, in 3TA lingo, which is metadata interface, cache management, FCI, they just need to be brought in. FCI happens to be something that we need to actually work on this kind of, before we do this, or in parallel, we actually have to bring the footprints into it, right? So we have to do this, but there is no, when you think up to date, there's actually no detailed definition of the interface.
Right. There is only the Alto interface. We decided long ago that we weren't going to build a bootstrap interface. If you want to bring a bootstrap interface, I think that's a perfectly fine thing to do. It's included in control. And we decided we were not going to define an FCI interface. We were going to let Alto do it. But there were proposals for both. I proposed a RESTful interface for FCI, and there was a proposal for a RESTful interface for Bootstrap. If the working group at that time was not ready to do it because we had a lot of other work. If we're now ready to take that on, it's within our charter, and we can certainly revisit that decision.
I think there's strong consensus on the CTF side to do this. That's sort of that kind of, these RESTful interfaces are kind of core of open caching, and I think they should be here.
Okay. So we've only got a couple minutes left. I want to give Sanjay a chance to close, unless anyone else has any comments on this particular topic.
Just one more comment, just 30 seconds, right? I think that at the time we talked about the MEL, because MEL was actually individual draft. Now it got adopted, right, as a working group draft.
No.
So we need to figure. No, not yet. Okay.
We cannot adopt it until we have a charter update.
Okay, so what I'm saying is that there's some coordination. So some of the things that are actually introduced in the name footprint, we should go back to that draft and say, hey, kind of, and see where it goes. But that's it.
Yep.
So one last item that I have, and then Kevin, I'll pass it on to you, because I thought you have something to add, right?
No, I'm good. I was just giving it back to you.
Oh, okay. All right, good. So the two things that I want to really bring here is that one is reviews, and we definitely need the CDNI participants to please review the documents. And I did hear Rajiv volunteer for reviewing the documents, but I've not heard others to volunteer, but they may be planning to do that. So, but I think what would be great is that if you can just send out an email in the mailing list and say that I've got this document, etc., in that I'm going to be reviewing, that would be great. That's number one. Number two is we're also looking for the active members to also become document shepherds. And I think it's a great way to get engaged in the IETF processes. And it really is a very straightforward process, very simple. And your role is to basically concisely put what this, if the document is obviously ready for submission to the IESG for the status of RFC, then you would basically preface the document with what this document is about and why this should be RFC'd. It's a very simple process, and then you will work with the authors through as they navigate with the reviews and comments back and forth. But your role is not very active, but just to make sure that the document is moving along, is not getting stuck somewhere. So we do need document shepherds that can step up and help the chairs with taking that responsibility. And with that, I'm just going to make sure that I give the mic. We have about 1 minute, and I want to make sure that Kevin and Chris, if they want to add anything.
I think you covered it. Thanks everyone for joining again today. I know it's evening time here in the US, so thanks for staying up late, and safe travels to everyone who is in Bangkok. Chris?
Very much so. I dropped a link to the document shepherding for those who may be interested in the chat.
Perfect.
We'll see everyone in Madrid.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care.